Hello, my name is Ernst Wilhelm, and I want to talk to you about some myths and secrets of Vedic astrology. Vedic astrology is the India that's preserved in India. We really don't know if it originated in India or if it originated somewhere else. In fact, in the old legend behind the most famous astronomical book in India is that astronomy and therefore astrology originated off an island that is no longer there off the coast of Africa, actually. Okay? A place they called Romaka in the old books. So we really don't know where it originated from because astrology is so old it predates any written culture. But India is unique in the fact that there's more astrological information stored in India than in all other countries and cultures combined. There's just such a wealth of knowledge there. However, this knowledge is carefully hidden. The books are available, you can buy the books, you can even get the books with English translations. But even then, the knowledge within these books is all very hidden. And because of that, only about 1% of the knowledge of the astrology preserved in India is actually used by your average astrologer. Okay? So it's very minimalistic of what's really there. And because of that, the average Vedic Hindu astrologer does not portray Vedic astrology properly. Western astrologers don't get a good shot of what Vedic or Hindu astrology really is. So I'm going to just do a series of classes talking about some of the different potentials and things that we can do with Vedic astrology, and then direct you to places that you can learn those techniques or get reports based on those techniques. So, like I was saying, the information is very much hidden in those old books. Those old books will have tons of like cookbook stuff. If, the 6 lords in the 8th house, this will be what your life is like. And those type of interpretations really don't work because they're written for an old culture. And they have to do with cultural things that aren't important to us, like having elephants and many wives and getting an audience of the king if you're lucky. Things that just are not part of our culture. So when we read those interpretations, it just sounds like a bunch of hogwash. But if we take all those interpretations out and we look into the techniques and get rid of those culturally defined narrow interpretations, and try to understand the techniques, that's when you really see the wealth. But again, even then it's hidden. So the first thing where it's hidden is in the Sanskrit. Many things in the old books, in the old astrological books, are given a Sanskrit name. And that name always defines the thing. Sanskrit's an old language, and in all old languages, the name of something defines the thing. And it was like that even in English language until relatively recently. For instance, if I met you 500 years ago in England and your name was Tom Weaver, well, I would know that you were a weaver, right? By knowing your last name, I know you're a weaver. But today, if I meet you and your name's Tom Weaver, you could be anything and probably not a weaver, right? But in ancient cultures, names always mean what it is. So the key to understanding any technique, really, in this old Sanskrit books, is not what they say about the technique, not the amount of elephants you're going to get, not the effects it's going to give, not how many wives it's going to give, which are the things these old books say. It's just delete all that stuff and you go right to, what does this Sanskrit word actually mean? Then you contemplate that Sanskrit word until you get the real meaning of what that combination of planets is going to do in the chart. Okay? So things are simply hidden right in front of us in the Sanskrit name. Then, the best techniques, we should say all techniques that are real, are all based on astronomy. There's so many techniques in these Hindu books that are written in Sanskrit where they just take something astronomical and they tell you how to calculate something astronomical and they give it a name and that's all they do. They don't tell you how to use it. They don't tell you what to do with it. They just give you an astronomical calculation in an astrology book that you're supposed to do. And then you're like, well, and they call it a kind of strength. They say this is this strength, this is how you calculate it, and that's all they do. So as a result, most people don't use it. Because it's just, the books don't tell us how. But they do tell us how. The telling how is behind understanding astronomy. So for these techniques, these ancient authors expect us to really concentrate on what's astronomically happening. What's that astronomical calculation really doing? And how does that astronomical calculation apply to the human person? Okay? And it all does. Because humans are a microcosm of the zodiac and the planets and all the other dozens and dozens of astronomical factors that Vedic astrology considers. So we have to contemplate the astronomy and bring that down into human existence. And that's what these ancient seers who created these techniques in the first place want us to do. So we have to study the astronomy. You can't be astronomically weak and put Vedic astrology to proper use. Then there's these mathematical techniques. And these are just various ways that the ancient books tell us how to determine a planet's well-being through mathematical calculations, and also something that goes along with them called avastas, which are just the conditions of the planet. So they give these 5 types of conditions combined with these few mathematical calculations, and they call it something, but they don't tell us how to use it. As a result, these are not used. 90% of this is not used, and 100% of this is not used by your average astrologer, because the books don't tell us how to do it. And so instead, the average astrologer uses very superficial interpretive techniques, which honestly turn a lot of people off and aren't the really profound parts of the astrology from India. So these mathematical calculations and these avastas are the key to making predictions. But they don't tell us how to do it. They just give the calculation. That's all they do. But if we study these calculations and again see what they're really doing and contemplate them and figure out how to put them together right, because you've got lots of calculations, lots of avastas, it's like a puzzle of getting them to work in synchronicity, then the horoscope falls into place. So the old books just give the calculations. They don't want to give us free information. They expect us to do the thinking, which is really, really nice of them. You might think, well, geez, why don't they just tell us? Why do they expect us to do all the thinking? Well, it's really honorable when someone expects you to do the thinking. That means they actually think you're capable of figuring it out. That's like a great compliment. The teacher who just feels like they have to tell you everything all the time and explain everything and tell you exactly how to do the technique, they're basically thinking you're too dumb to figure it out on your own, so I have to tell you. That's really insulting. The complimentary teacher and the good teacher is a teacher that lets you, wants you to figure it out yourself because he feels like you can. Unfortunately, it's lots of times easier for the teacher to just tell you, and it's so much easier for the student to not think for themselves and just want to be told. And that's a big problem in any field of study. Well, these old books, which are conceived by really wise men, they decided they were going to make us do the thinking. And so we should appreciate that they feel like that we can do the thinking. Okay? So we got to think through this and figure it out. Then there's one text, which is called Jaimini's, or Jaimini, Upadesha Sutras. Upadesha Sutras. And this book is actually written in coded Sanskrit. It's the one book where he tells you step by step how to make predictions. It's the only book that goes step by step. Do this, then do this. If this is like this, do this, or else do this. Wonderful. Unfortunately, he gives it in coded Sanskrit. So you don't know what he wants you to do, even though he's telling you verbatim, step by step. So we have another conundrum. So the 4 methods of teaching astrology that the old masters used all force us to think for ourselves. With the Jaimini's Upadesha Sutras, we have to figure out how to decode that sutra. And we won't be able to do that if we don't understand all these things. But once we do, we can start figuring out how the sutras actually work and what he actually wants us to do. Then it seems like child's play. The techniques in this book are by far the most accurate technique. There's techniques that I use for prediction elections that are 90% accurate, which is as good as any technique ever gets. 90% is like off the charts in accuracy. The average astrologer is using techniques that work, if they're lucky, 60% of the time. So this book has awesome techniques, and it tells us exactly how to do it, but in coded Sanskrit. So the astrologer has to spend months, sometimes years, trying to figure out one technique to break that code in the proper way to get the words to say what the author of this book is trying to say. So the reason Vedic astrology is not represented properly is because of how the information is given, how the true juice of the science of astrology is given. It's given in scientific ways: coded Sanskrit, mathematics, astronomy, and Sanskrit, all of which are very scientific in their structures and meanings and mathematics. And so, because they are scientific, if somebody approaches them with logic and a lot of devotion, a lot of contemplation, these things start revealing a depth of astrology that is just so profound. Nothing else on earth even comes close. There is nothing in comparison in any other branch of astrology to these astronomical and mathematical techniques, or these. Just nothing compares. It's just the depth of Vedic astrology is amazing. But it takes a lot of thinking. And there's few people that will spend that much time. You know, it took me 2 years. My record for breaking a sutra in this text is 2 years. And it was kind of funny, you know, I was spending just the sutra, I'd work on it for 3 days straight and I couldn't figure it out. You know, I'd be using it intellectually. And after a while I'd have to go back to working again. And then the sutra would be stuck in my head. It was Upapada Padam Pitur Anacharat. And it would be stuck in my head, and every once in a while I'd be hanging out with my wife and getting a glazed look on my eyes. And she'd say, "What are you thinking about?" I'm like, "Oh, of course I'm thinking about you." And she would laugh, and she would quote the sutra. So that was like a 2-year thing, you know. And then one day, I just knew that I had to decode the sutra a certain way, and it would turn out to give me a certain number. I went to the sutra, did that, and indeed it turned out to be that number, and that sutra was broken. So you can see these guys really expect us to think, because thinking creates inner development. You know, when we think and contemplate, it develops us. And we get that aha experience, like when I broke the sutra, aha, then you get the juices flowing and the happiness hormones flowing. It's like this moment of enlightenment, and it's worth the 2 years of working on one sutra, you know. So they want us to do that. They want us to study the astrology for the purpose of self-development, and so we really understand how everything's working. And we just aren't going to do that if we're verbatim told everything. So it's not like the old seers were trying to be mean and didn't really want to tell us how to do it. They wanted to, but they didn't want to do it at the expense of our own learning process and development, because they were truly the best teachers. And because of that, unfortunately, Vedic astrology is not nearly as appreciated as it is. It's either talked about with devotional fervor by people who just believe it's the best without even knowing any of this stuff. So they say, oh, Vedic astrology is so good for predicting events. And then it doesn't live up to its reputation because people aren't using these techniques. Or people go, gosh, those old books just have all this weird stuff in it that doesn't even apply to modern life, so why bother? Western astrology is a lot better. No, if you study it properly, the way the ancient authors expected us to think and study, it's a world of knowledge like you cannot believe. And there's so much of it there because India has more astrology simply preserved there. Okay? So you can just get an idea of just how much there is, I hope, in Vedic astrology. And in future videos, I'll be talking about, just real simply, different types of techniques that are out there. I'm not going to really teach them. I'm just going to let you be aware of the things you can look forward to, either in studying or having your chart read with in Vedic astrology. So you can really take advantage of this great, great science, which is like nowhere else on earth. So whether we have India to thank for discovering astrology, you know, I don't know. I wouldn't even go there. There's no way to prove it, and it may well have come from elsewhere. But without a doubt, there's more useful astrological information stored in India, preserved in India, than in all other cultures combined. So if we really want to go to astrology, that's really where we should be heading, to India. Okay, meaning to these books, which now we can get in India or get in all over the world. You know, to Hindu astrology, to the astrology preserved there. Thank you.